It's interesting. We got pretty encouraged after the end of November passed and we suddenly saw this big accumulation the first 4 days of December. They added roughly 0.25% of the entire supply, which is a ton. And we expected that this would push prices up.
Hey folks, welcome into the Thinking Crypto podcast. I'm your host, Tony Edward, and joining me is Brian from Santiment. And as you all know, we are going to do a deep dive into the metrics to get an understanding of what's happening with Bitcoin, altcoins, and the entire crypto market. Brian, great to see you.
Good to see you, Tony. Up and down in the markets lately, but, I think, if there's ever a good time for sentiment to come into play, it's right now, because every time people are getting a little bullish, they get disappointed. Every time they get bearish and sell off, they're also disappointed. So it's been kind of a range between maybe 85 and 92K for Bitcoin the last couple of weeks. And I would anticipate that continues until the crowd stops overreacting to every swing.
Yeah, it's tough out there, Brian. A lot of people are getting depressed and the sentiment is not good. I saw this morning was an extreme fear because Bitcoin had another pullback, and a lot of people are disappointed. That usually this market has wrapped up around this time with a blow off top, but that's not the case.
Yeah.
And or a traditional blow off top with a euphoric retail crowd and much more. So maybe we could start with Bitcoin sentiment. How are people feeling right now?
Yeah, let's take a look at the metrics, beginning with Bitcoin, which is always probably the most important because it's dictating how everything else is going. And from what I've seen lately, I'll start with just the positive and negative sentiment here. It's come down a little. So this is our latest date right here. You can see there's at the top left of my screen, it shows 1.2 positive comments for every one negative comment, giving a ratio of 1.2 there. So we're not in this FOMO range anymore, but you can see, as I talked about over the last 10 days, we went from super bearish, where there's 0.75 bullish to bearish comments. That's very low. Then all of a sudden we got FOMO on just a very minor rebound. You can see that 90K is a big psychological encouragement level for a lot of people to start to get bullish again. So they get bullish, they get disappointed again. And now we're kind of in the middle of the range here once again.
Yeah, man. And I know a lot of people are waiting for this chop to stop and it's almost like they want to know which direction we're going. Are we going to go up, right? Start a parabolic move or whatever it may be, or rally? Or are we going to go down to a bear market? I think the boring aspect is getting some people, shaking them out, right? And then
Yep.
These violent swings, even though they're not kind of clear, it's part of the chop.
Exactly. And, we can see further evidence of the indecisiveness of the crowd when we look at the amount of calls that are related to lower or below versus higher or above. And the red is the higher or above. You can see how they got super excited when Bitcoin jumped back above 93K a week ago. And then it started to fade. People weren't fazed by it. They were trying to buy the dip here. And that caused an even bigger dip, a little covered by the text here, but you get the idea. It got back down to about 88K. And then we ranged for a bit. You can see the blue and red bars are mixed. And then all of a sudden, big breakout for blue bars right after this big drop right here yesterday. So the latest data we're seeing shows a lot of fear as we got back down to 85K. And even as we rise, the bearish narrative is still dominating, which is generally a good thing, right? Because most rallies that heat up do so while the crowd is like, oh, stay away. It's just a fake bull trap. It's something that's going to bite you in the butt if you get too excited about it, because they're still thinking about last week when they got too excited themselves and they got disappointed. So this time they're like, okay, fool me once. And they're proclaiming that we're going to go lower, which, as we know, Tony, increases the likelihood of us going higher.
Yeah, absolutely. The market always does the opposite of the herd.
Yep.
What does Bitcoin MVRV look like?
Yeah, let's take a look at MVRV. So 30-day wise, it's right at about zero, sitting at about negative 0.7%. not in a danger zone, not in an opportunity zone. Swing traders are pretty much break even right where they should be in a zero sum game. Now, the good news is that on a long term basis, the 365-day MVRV, it's sitting at negative 14%, meaning long term wise, there's still plenty of meat on the bone for us to rise back to that 0% average that traders will hover around for all different timeframes. So you don't want to be in MVRVs in an investment when both the short and long term are super high, like they were in mid July, and of course at the all time high in early October. But now, with the blue line representing the long term MVRV being in pretty dominantly negative range, there's a little bit of upside right now to adding onto your position if you're in it for the long run. Don't expect this to have much impact next week, but if you're holding for a 1 year period, this justifies that and tells you you'd be in a good spot because others are in pain.
Mm. So, man, it's such a weird time in the market. So we'll have to wait and see how this plays out. What are Bitcoin whales doing? Are they starting to accumulate?
So on the whale side, it's interesting. We got pretty encouraged after the end of November passed and we suddenly saw this big accumulation the first 4 days of December. They added roughly 0.25% of the entire supply, which is a ton. And we expected that this would push prices up. And it did. We saw, just in that 4 day span, Bitcoin went up a little under 4%. Great. The problem is they kind of stopped that big accumulation all of a sudden. And they're now kind of dancing and moving sideways again, even moving just a slight bit down over the last week. Meanwhile, retail continues to go up. So they're trying to accumulate more and more and more, thinking that we're going to get back to 100K. At least that's what the on-chain data is saying. We obviously saw social data-wise, there's a lot of people proclaiming lower. So it's interesting when you see retail acting one way on-chain, but being very bearish vocally on social media. And that's kind of what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, and we've looked at this correlation before that the whales, they stop their accumulation if retail is accumulating. And then, the vice versa. If retail starts capitulating and they're distributing or just giving up, then the whales start buying. So hopefully this reverses what we're seeing here.
Exactly. So the key, if you remember that color coded article I did about a month ago, like the green zones are when you've got this whale line moving up and the retail line moving down. Right now, it's kind of the opposite. At least over the last week, the green line's moving down and the red line's moving up, which is generally a red zone and can justify a price decline. Not going to say that's a guarantee. We've seen plenty of anomalies here, but we believe, Tony, in probability of something occurring, and the probability of a rise would be a lot less likely until this, especially, breaks down a bit.
And I don't know if ETF inflows are worth looking at, but maybe we can glance at it because ETFs can be a bit hit and miss.
Yeah, of course. So we do have up-to-date data, and it's actually been very quiet. There's not a lot of movement in either direction. It's just very few ups and downs. It seems like a lot of people are just waiting for the end of the year to happen right now after that big outflow segment that we saw in November, especially mid-November. So I don't see much to really get excited or concerned about as far as this goes.
Yeah, that makes sense. It feels like, I don't know, we're going to end the year on a kind of disappointing note, given, what we've seen it historically, but we could see maybe a relief rally or the continuation of this bull market, maybe January, February. We're going to have to wait and see.
Yeah, I mean, we might be surprised because normally when you really think about the logic behind the end of the year being kind of a disappointment, that usually happens when you have big bullish years. And we're actually in the negatives this year. We saw, if I can compare it to the S&P and gold, and we go back 1 year, and I'm just going to, so they're all on the same axis, obviously different percentage changes because Bitcoin's more volatile than the other two. But If I just go back to December 16th of last year, I'm holding down shift. You can see the top left of my screen, how it's changing. So Bitcoin's actually down roughly 18% on the year. Normally, you see big disappointing final weeks of the year when those institutionals are taking profit for tax purposes, whatever. There's no profit to be taken, at least by most uh, sane human people who haven't predicted markets perfectly. Therefore, I don't expect the same level of just like dumping going into 2026 as we did, for example, in 2023 or 2024. There were some minor dumps toward the end of the year because they were such bullish years.
Yeah, it's a good point. Um, and there are other signals that are showing like Bitcoin is very oversold, RSI and so forth on different time levels. So to your point, at some point the sellers are going to get exhausted, and there's not going to be any type of major selling, and maybe it's just continual chop and sideways movement.
Exactly. Yeah. And one note too on that vein that you mentioned, I think part of the disappointment comes from, the fact that we've got Bitcoin doing this over the past couple of months since that all-time high on October 6th, while the S&P and gold, you get the idea, they're kind of hovering. And even though we haven't declined like massively, it is like a 30% drop since the all-time high, but we've seen much more massive drops. I just think it's so disappointing because the crypto community is watching, their fellow gold bug friends or their equity trader friends be fine and continue to push all-time highs week in and week out. And that just makes the pain of a 30% drop feel more like a 60% drop because you're comparing it to the what ifs. What if I invested in Amazon this whole time, or Apple, or just index funds, or a bunch of gold mining companies, or just
Or
bought a bunch of
silver.
gold bars? Yeah, silver is going nuts too. I mean, they've all done very well while Bitcoin's just left people with regret.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, Brian, because you have this price action, while on the other side of the token, you have the most incredible adoption news that we've seen in a long time. JP Morgan and
Mhm.
Visa and the OCC giving banks green light to do all these things. And it's incredible. Like news that would drive the market crazy in other times, but right now it's not. It's a big disconnect.
Exactly. I just saw it was trending yesterday. It's out of the top 5 today on our trending stories um, countdown, but I'm seeing new mass adoption news coming out every couple of days that are like legitimate stories, not just,
Yep.
a minor company, but, NASDAQ trading expansion. That's the latest that's come out. They plan to extend their weekday trading hours from 16 to 23 hours. That gives people a lot more time to trade, uh, and expect SEC approval on that. Um, but stuff like that, there was some stuff about Grayscale. Yeah, right here. Um, Experts like Bitwise, Grayscale predict Bitcoin will break its 4-year cycle and reach new all-time highs in 2026. That's a pretty good sign coming from two of the most influential companies out there. Um, uh, even MetaMask, which is one of the more trusted companies in terms of how people can store their crypto, that's getting more and more support and native Bitcoin adoption over time, expanding MetaMask beyond Ethereum and Solana. I mean, this is generally pretty good news.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just seems to have no effect right now.
It's all short term versus long term, right? People
Yeah.
see these headlines and think that Bitcoin's just going to miraculously jump 20% overnight. But the reality is they're more just long term seeds that are being planted to give crypto more room to grow in the next few years.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's take a look at altcoins. We could start with Ethereum. I don't know if it's worth looking at altcoins because, Bitcoin leads the show and the market follows Bitcoin, but I'm curious if things look similar on Ethereum, as far as sentiment and MVRV.
Yeah. So Ethereum's ratio of positive versus negative comments still looks pretty positive, honestly, for Ethereum. It's staying pretty high despite the drop. I just think it's not getting as much hate as Bitcoin whenever it falls itself, but Ethereum did break below that 3K resistance. It's a big psychological support for a lot of people. I would expect if it stays low like this might start to come down a little bit more. But for now, the sentiment is fine. As far as XRP goes, yeah, I mean, they actually just had a really big bullish day, interestingly, and then prices dropped and then it came down a little, but XRP is still looking like it's got quite a bit of positive sentiment itself. Solana, very negative, interestingly. I don't know exactly why that would be, but look at how Solana has been one of the better performers over the past 24 hours ever since this negative bar jumped down this far.
Yeah,
So,
and they just
yeah.
had their conference last week, and there was huge announcements. I think JP Morgan and a bunch of other things happening. So yeah, it's surprising. But then, it's all related to the market sentiment and cyclical pattern. So regardless if you have the greatest news, if you were already in a downtrend, it's probably not going to do much.
Well said. Yeah, I think that's very true. And we can look at SWE as well. So I know we've covered them on our shows a lot. Looking still pretty negative. It's got a similar bounce to Solana over the past day, while the negative sentiment has been more prominent. So that makes sense. Any other coins off the top of your head?
XRP, can take a look at that.
We just did XRP, I
Oh,
believe.
I'm sorry, yeah.
No, all good.
Yeah.
So we did that. We saw that positive spike, and now it's a little less positive, but still up there. I mean, this long-term growth is quite interesting, actually, where it's jumped over time. So even though XRP has gotten kind of hammered price-wise, the faithful out there are sticking with them.
What about the MVRV for XRP and ETH?
So while we're on XRP, we'll do that first. Still quite negative. This is a good sign for XRP holders, especially with the optimism going on. About negative 9% on the 30-day MVRV and about negative 22% on the long term. So going back to like we'll just do the last year. Yeah, you can see this was like off the charts after that huge jump back in January. But the closest we have to what we've seen recently was back on November 21st or so, when we saw negative 18 and negative 25% MVRVs, and then prices jumped up. And then they kind of got a little more neutral and started falling again. I think this is a pretty good sign for XRP, considering we haven't seen both the 30 and 365-day MVRVs this low in a long time.
Man, it's just that cyclical pattern as you're showing you on the chart, right? If you don't understand the data, you may say, "Oh my God, that's horrible," but it's actually good, setting up for another major move.
Yeah, it's a good lesson where you don't want to buy when the MVRV is above 70%, like we saw back in July. So don't buy here. It may seem obvious in hindsight, like, oh yeah, look at all these green bars. Don't buy there. But the actual average trading returns are validating that the wallets that had been active during that time were up way more than their normal zero-sum game, giving it an overvaluation signal that implies it's going to come back down to earth. And then, of course, it did. We go negative here. Remember, it's best when both the lines are in negative or both are in positive. That's what gives the best signals. Like here, too. Perfect time to sell temporarily. Even more perfect time to sell here. And then perfect time to buy, even though it was very short-lived. So now we're both still in negative range. I'd call this, a 9 out of 10 on the risk-free scale, if you will.
And then for MVRV for ETH, I don't know if you guys added for Solana as well. I remember you were saying you were working on that.
We don't have Solana's MVRV yet,
Okay.
specifically. We do have a few other on-chain metrics if we do want to look into it. But first, we can check out Ethereum over the past year. Yeah, they had, just like XRP, that big negative spike here on November 21st, and then prices bounced at the top. Yeah, they bounced even bigger. They went up about 25% during that time before you can see this orange line got up to about plus 13%, and then we topped right away. So looking okay for Ethereum. They're both in negative range, which is good, just not quite extreme the way XRP does. So from just a pure math perspective, the most likely coin for a relief rally of the big players looks like XRP for a very short-term basis if you want to get some swing trades out there based on what the math is dictating.
That's good insight. I guess the last one here we can look at before we wrap it up is ZCash. I know that was rallying pretty strong for a while. It has cooled down since. I'm curious what things are looking like now.
Yeah, they had a major cool down. We'll actually look at the sentiment. I think that's probably best for this particular asset. So I remember on that big rally, nobody was believing in it, right? It was kind of laughed at almost because Zcash is looked at as this ancient dinosaur privacy coin that has mostly been forgot about since, I don't know, 2017 or 18, back from that initial bull run where I was first learning about crypto at that time. But yeah, you can see this one weird outlier. But other than that, like during the rally, sentiment was very negative. And then, it finally saw a little bit of a top, not much change. In fact, this was bizarre. I don't know if it was bots or what, but it was like 31-1 in terms of bullish versus bearish comments. And then it cooled down again. I don't see anything showing much of an outlier in either direction right now. It looks like there's about 1.7 bullish to 1 bearish comment, which is pretty normal for an altcoin. They tend to skew a little higher than Bitcoin does.
Interesting. And I wonder if there, how Zcash was this like anomaly that just started rallying despite market conditions. If there's the market makers or whoever is pulling the strings here are gonna pick another altcoin, and it will start seeing these random altcoins popping off.
Yeah, I mean, I've looked for a few signs over time to see what kind of initiated the big rally. Sometimes the only explanation is it's a lot of institutionals who just decided to take interest all at once and then kind of reel in the retail to keep the rally going for them. We do see social dominance here, which is kind of interesting. So look at how this big social dominance spike came in right when Zcash, like literally the day before it hit its big top above 735, and then it dropped off. So sometimes a good substitute for sentiment, if it's not showing you much, is just looking at the percentage of the pie that one coin is taking up in terms of the discussions on a daily basis. And nobody was talking about Zcash back here. It was getting 0.04, 0.06% of crypto discussions per day. And then at its top, 3.5% of all discussions related to different coins were being directed at Zcash, which is normally just not being talked about at all. But it's still up here at the number 17 market cap rank. Can't remember what it was prior to the rally, but it was, I don't even know if it was in the top 30, top 40. Someone in the comments may know, but things have changed a lot. It's super volatile still, but if you want to take some chances, I mean, funding rate can be an interesting signal as well. There was some shorting going on. Now it's kind of back to neutral. God, look at all these shorts right here, by the way. I haven't checked this out before. Tons and tons of shorts as it just kept on rallying. You talk about why the rally continued for so long. These are all the people who were betting against Zcash during that late October to early November run when it finally peaked. Got a bunch of liquidations here, and then finally the shorts started to become less prevalent.
Wow. It's so fascinating, and I'm wondering, to your point, is it just institutions, or is it still just breadcrumbs of a bull market, that we're seeing before another major continuation? I guess we're going to have to wait and see.
Exactly. I think we'll continue to monitor these different signals that we're showing you on these videos, guys, day by day. Check out our insights page and, of course, our social media at Santiment feed. And it should give you quite a bit of information about what you can expect next.
Yeah, by the way, I think that's a good call out, folks. Make sure you follow Santiment because you guys are putting out like great analysis on some of these coins, daily updates, and all that. It's very helpful stuff.
Thanks, brother. Yours is also something we get inspired by all the time. So keep up the great work.
So, Brian, I'm going to kind of try to reverse jinx myself. I hope we crash down to lower lows and the bull market's over.
I know.
So
it seems like whatever we're rooting for, the crypto gods seem to smirk at us and do the opposite. But one of these days we'll get it how we want it.
Yeah, like I said, it's just a weird time. I think if we weren't seeing, all this positive news and just incredible adoption news and regulators giving massive clarity, it probably wouldn't be as weird. But you have that happening, but price action is doing the complete opposite.
It is. It's such a different game these days with so many institutionals and major corporations involved in crypto. It's not the the people's decentralized option like it seemed to be 4 to 8 years ago during the 2017 and 21 rallies. But I'm still confident crypto has a great future ahead of it. It's just different, and we have to accept that it's different and act accordingly.
Yeah, for sure. All right, good stuff, Brian. I guess our next one will be in the new year, and we'll kick off 2026 and with some fresh data and see how the market looks. And hopefully 2026 is a very good year. But thank you so much, man.
Thanks, brother. Happy holidays to everybody.